What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports. We are here on the Oklahoma channel at the voice of college football. In this video, we are going to preview the 2022 schedule for the Sooners. Before we get to 2022, let's look back at 2021. Here is the schedule from 2021. You can see Nebraska, Tulane, Western Carolina. Those were the non-conference games. Not too tough of a non-conference schedule. Thought that Tulane was going to be better last year. They wound up finishing with a pretty bad record. And then Nebraska, of course, we know they were much better than their record would suggest. That wound up being a really good game. But like I said, Nebraska, I should say, played everyone tough. So, I mean, I don't think you can fault that Oklahoma for that game being close. But again, you look at the rest of the schedule. Who do they play on the road in the Big 12? They play Kansas State, Kansas, Baylor, and Oklahoma State on the road. This says at Texas, but of course that game on a neutral field. So they're going to play every year. They'll play 4 home, 4 away, 1 neutral site game in the Big 12. But they wound up having to play both Baylor and Oklahoma State on the road, the two best teams in the Big 12, the two teams that went to the Big 12 championship. Coming into the year, we thought it was going to be Oklahoma and Iowa State, and they had Iowa State at home. That's why it seemed like Oklahoma had a really favorable schedule, and a schedule that was going to set them up to make the Big 12 championship. But we didn't realize that Baylor and Oklahoma State were going to be so good, and it wound up being a tough schedule in the conference because they had to play both Baylor and Oklahoma State on the road. You have to wonder, what if just one of those games had been flipped? What if they had played Baylor or Oklahoma State at home? Would the Sooners perhaps have made it to the Big 12 championship? Well, let's look at 2022 here. First, we start with those non-conference games. So they'll play UTEP, Kent State, and on the road at Nebraska. Those are the 3 non-conference games. That Nebraska game is going to be tough. It's on the road. Nebraska is going to be a pretty good team. Again, they were much better than their record would suggest last season. Who do they play home? Who do they play away? They play TCU on the road. They play Iowa State on the road. They play West Virginia on the road. And they play Texas Tech on the road. That's pretty favorable, at least with what we think is the big picture in the Big 12. We think that Baylor and Iowa State are going, not Iowa State, Oklahoma State, I should say, we think that those are going to be the 2 teams that are near the top of the Big 12, along with maybe Oklahoma, maybe Texas. But you get both of those games at home this year. So while Oklahoma had to play Baylor and Oklahoma State on the road last year, they'll get them at home this year. And I think that sets up really, really well for the Sooners. So they start with UTEP, they play Kent State, then they play Nebraska. So their 3 non-conference games are those first 3 weeks. Then they'll get Kansas State after that on September 24th at home. TCU on the road October 1st, and then the big game against Texas on October the 8th. So a good chance for this team to go 5-0. Nebraska will be tough. Not saying they'll win that game, but if they can beat Nebraska, I think there's a pretty good chance this team will start off 5-0. And then they'll get the game against Texas. If you win that, then you get Kansas, Iowa State with no Brock Purdy. Probably not going to be as tough this year. Big game against Baylor on November 5th, but it will be a home game. Follow that up with West Virginia, tough place to play on the road, November 12th. Back home against Oklahoma State on November 19th. And then they close out the year on the road at Texas Tech. So I think the way this sets up in the Big 12, you couldn't ask for much more than this. The only thing that I would maybe want to flip if I was an Oklahoma fan, I'd want to put Kansas on the road. Just go ahead and play that game on the road. And then maybe get a West Virginia or a Texas Tech at home. But other than that, I mean, the home and away really sets up well for them. I don't expect Iowa State to be quite as good this year. Kansas State's a tough place to play on the road. You get them at home. You get the 2 teams that went to the Big 12 championship at home last year with Baylor and Oklahoma State. So I think this schedule puts Oklahoma in a really good position to make it to the Big 12 championship. And then in the non-conference, it's going to be all about Nebraska. That game will really set the tone for the season. If they can win that game, like I said, good chance to be 5-0 going into that Texas game and working their way back up towards the top 10, or who knows, maybe even into college football playoff contention. So a really nice Big 12 schedule for Oklahoma coming up in 2022.